Hello, everybody, and here we are once again. What is Truth? Part 91. And two gentlemen that had the presumption to attempt to define, or not define, approach the subject of truth that was posed to Jesus Christ by Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate asking, what is truth? And Jesus Christ just standing there silently as his reply. Of course, we know he is the way, the truth, and the life, so he didn't have to say anything. He was being it. And so when you get into something that's that profound, and to me, it's clearly one of the more profound episodes within Scripture. And so that being said, it's good to remind ourselves that the rules of order are basic humility. Is that it's such a profound riddle that we can only approach it in small measured steps, and one step forward, two steps back at times. But that's okay, because it's for the glorification of the message of glory, I guess, the message of grace. And so there, I think I've chased away the materialists, and now we can begin our discussion. Reverend David, how are you doing there, friend?
Gosh, well, I've got my usual first Sunday of the month sort of marathon. So we're back from our services of worship. Very poor turnout physically today. I mean, my love to the online congregants as always, but very poor physical turnout because any excuse you can get not to go to church is what the British will use. They tend to forget that the church is a gift, not a punishment. I mean, there will be a time, according to Scripture, if you read it carefully, when the church is no longer there as an opportunity. And I hope they know roughly what they're doing after that, which they may not. Yeah, so it's a rush. I'm at a TV studio tomorrow. Can't mention anything. And we got opening night of the play Tuesday, so I couldn't feel much more pressured or tired, if I'm honest. It's a boiling day again. The Indian summer has come back. Still poor, still overworked, having fun, looking like what did you say, a digger or a leveler? Looking like a leveler, which I'm very proud of. And yeah, I mean, having a reasonably fine time. How about yourself, John?
As well as could be expected. I just, being domestic and handling domestic chores has been more than enough for myself. But that being said, fortunately, I can contemplate the riddles of the universe while I'm picking weeds in the yard. But of course, I do it respectfully, because I realize that Mother Earth doesn't like to have her hair pull out, but to meet the conventions of the norm, it's deemed necessary. So in getting into this a little bit, I had a brief quotation that I thought I had pulled up, but it appears I don't, so I'll just keep talking until I get there, because it's located in a few different places. I want to find it in a place where it's not going to start talking. That kind of confuses everything. Here we go. Now, this is a quotation from Rudolf Steiner's lecture cycle that was published under the title Cosmic and Human Metamorphosis. And this is from Lecture 2 in Berlin on February 13th, 1917. It's Collected Works 175. It's a little bit long, but I wanted to trim it down, but it would leave out some important aspects. So I'll just kind of see how we go here. Quote, "If a man be deadened by materialism, he may indeed deny the existence of a spiritual world. But he cannot kill out in himself the forces which are able to seek a connection with the spiritual world. He may delude himself as to the existence of the spiritual world, but he cannot kill out those forces in his soul which are intended to bring him in touch with the spiritual world. This has very significant consequences, which should be taken into account, especially at the present time. Forces are there and they work, whether their existence is believed in or not. The materialist does not forbid the spiritually inclined forces in his soul to work. He cannot do so, and they do work. You may say, is it then possible for a man to be a materialist and yet to have forces at work within him which are seeking the spiritual? Yes, that is the case. These forces are at work within him. No matter what he may do, they work within him. What effect do they have? Well, wherever there are forces present, their own original activity can be suppressed, but then they transform themselves into something else, into different forces. You see, my dear friends, if we do not employ the spiritually tending forces for gaining understanding of the spiritual world, I only say understanding, for that is all that is required at first. These forces will transform themselves into the forces of illusion in human life. Their activity then takes the form of inducing a man to be subject to all kinds of illusions regarding the external world. It is not without significance that this should be realized in our time, for never have people indulged their imagination as they do today, although they do not care for imagination, as their imagination only works along definite lines. If it were desired to give examples of this, of the fanciful weavings of people who entirely desire to be realists, materialists, light could be thrown on all sorts of things. There would be no end to it. We might perhaps begin, were it not heretical, by glancing at what statesmen have prophesied even a few weeks ago as to the probable course of events in the world and what has occurred since. And we shall see that the capacities of illusion have played no small part for some years. We might investigate many of the departments of life in the same way, and it's quite remarkable to note that everywhere we find these strongly developed capacities of illusion. Indeed, they sometimes even lend a childlike, I might almost say a childish character to the opinions and attitude of life of materialistically inclined people. When one sees what is required today to make men understand each other, or to try and make them see what is before their very nose, one can understand what I mean by saying childlike or even childish. Well, my dear friends, it is even so. When people turn away from the spiritual world, they must pay for it by becoming subject to illusion, by losing the capacity of forming accurate concepts concerning external physical reality and the course of events therein. They are then compelled to exercise their imagination in another direction because they refuse to hold by the truth, whether the truth concerns the spiritual or the physical life. It comes to the same thing. They turn away from it. End quote. And of course, the links for that particular lecture are below over here on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, you're going to have to come over here to find them. And there you have it. A great summation of what happens when one attempts to work within a closed system based on materialism. Because you don't admit the existence of extra physical forces, you cannot compensate for it through material forces. And so there's a certain chaos that ensues, even in the realm of thinking. And that's why Rudolf Steiner frequently makes the point that abstract thinking always leads to conflict, because it's incapable of solving a problem. You can't figure out how to divide something by using a plus sign. It doesn't work. And I don't know that that's a good analogy. But anyways, I thought I'd throw that on your plate there, Reverend David.
Yeah. Not sure whether I go along with all of that 100%. I remember all of those Soviet books I used to read that were genuinely...
Because you have materialist sympathies.
That's such a huge word. I mean, what everybody's trying to pretend, theist, materialist, atheist, et al., is that their word is narrow and precise and nobody else knows what they're talking about. The trouble is all of those words are gigantic. Theist is gigantic, atheist is gigantic, materialist is gigantic. Yeah.
Yeah, but see, when you start getting into like what you're talking about, you're somebody who's actually delved into the literature itself and these, what we'll call them, specialists. And they work within a proprietary philosophical language, and they have very specific meanings that they're applying there. But the end result of that discourse devolves as it reaches out into the mass public, until it gets to the kind of entropy in the realm of thought, to where you get a common individual that just doesn't believe in anything.
Sort of go with that as these things unpack into the wider society, they lose all sense of worth. They lose all definition. I mean, I remember reading some of the early Soviet stuff where they were really trying their best to outline what a spirituality of materialism might be. And some of it was genuinely uplifting. It was really exciting. You know, the idea of, yeah, we've got to a certain stage and that's good. What comes next? And let's make things very tangible and tactile. And there's an ecstasy to that. There's a spirituality to that. And I remember feeling very energized by those things. I'm not even sure that particular view reached the West, if I'm honest. You know, as you were saying those things, I mean, I was reminded of the fact that in certain ways, some of my interests belong to a different part of the world. And, you know, I don't assume that everything goes from one culture to another. I've never assumed that. And I think there's a very strong case to show that it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking of people like Richard Dawkins and the row he had once with, oh God, what's the guy with the diamonds in his glasses again? One of the best friends of Michael Jackson. Oh God, very, very famous guru pundit. It'll come to me in a minute. He recently had a debate with him, which I thought got nowhere on both sides. Deepak Chopra. And it was, you know, he ended up losing patience with Richard. Richard can play a very sneaky game. You know, I noticed in one of because he's a part of the whole skeptics conference, which stand against all the paranormal conferences. And they've got a prize, a sum of money for anyone that can disprove them, exactly like the paranormal people have a prize for anyone, cash money for anyone that can disprove them. And I noticed at one of the dialogues, it came up by accident. I don't monitor these discussions. I think they're fatuous. You know, that certain psychics had got so close to actually getting that money that Richard felt he needed to say something. And so he changed the rules of the game. If one of these psychics manages to actually fulfill the conditions of this discussion, then his ability must somehow be natural because there is no other way of doing it. And you think, well, no, let's change the goalposts. Let's actually change the goalposts. So, you know, no matter, right, so God turns up and says, you know, hi, Richard. But yes, what that means is, you know, so there's no way of actually defeating that. But the trouble is the other side strikes me as largely the same. gosh, there's so much I want to say to that. You know, I noticed Deepak Chopra talking about, what was it, that old magician, John? What was it, Randy, the great Fizzog? The great.
Yeah, Randall.
Oh God, what an annoying,
The amazing Randy.
Oh, an annoying individual. You know, I mean, he used to go around debunking things, you know, whatever floats your boat, darling. You know, it doesn't answer a single intellectual debate. If that's good for you, you do it. But I noticed Deepak Chopra said about all of them, Richard et al., that he'd be willing to have a refereed debate in any academic journal because they're all just what is called in philosophy naive realists. They take sensory input at face value and then make a series of assumptions to show that it's true. And Deepak Chopra is correct. There is no way round that argument, whether they like that or not. And that's pure academic philosophy. Nobody's talking about faith. Nobody's talking about belief. Nobody's talking about religion. Those are the rules of epistemology. So, yeah. So, you know, there's a reductio ad absurdum to all of these things, which means I did like the attempts to reach a spirituality of matter that I read. I mean, there was that zest in certain early science fiction writers. It's certainly there in H.G. Wells. It's, oh God, the great French writer, my brain this afternoon. Jules Verne. It's certainly there in Jules Verne. You know, you're still on the edge of a new world with exciting possibilities, and there is a spirituality to it. I was also thinking, as you were reading out that quote, of something in Swedenborg, which was very depressing, as he goes into ever deeper hell worlds. He gets to one of the deepest. I've not read the whole of Swedenborg, so I can't say I know it's the deepest of terror worlds, but it's pretty down there, where the people. I mean, you've got to remember, at the end of the day, Swedenborg is some sort of anthroposophist. He thinks that the humane is the measure of all creation. Therefore, you know, we need to look at some point on this show at what anthroposophy is, and the fact that Rudolf Steiner, who may have indeed coined the term, isn't the only great Western adept operator of that term. I mean, I think Swedenborg very clearly qualifies, although of course he wouldn't have used that word because it didn't exist. But you know, you get people, you get human beings, or at least they were at one point, literally who believe they're trashing the universe. They're strutting, they're dancing on the ruins of the universe. And Swedenborg, with his own guide, rather like Dante, rather Dante-esque, notices that all they're really seeing is the reflection of stars in pools beneath their feet. So what they're actually doing is trampling over the reflections of stars in their contempt for the created order. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my God, how terrible. I mean, how could people like that ever be redeemed? But of course, I'm not the savior. Thank heavens, all of us are not the savior. And that was a terrifying story for me. You know, the level of self-obsession, the level of fantasy could go as far as they would like to trample the universe simply to show they're correct. And that struck me as very believable, sadly, as a form of twisted psychology. I don't know. I suppose it's because I've just come from a Gnostic service of worship that I'm thinking of the demiurge, and I'm thinking of you know, what part did the dark powers play in the creation of this universe? And of course, they are there as part of it. Steiner never denies the involvement of either Ahriman or Lucifer in sort of maintaining this flux, this fluidity of creation. And I think it's, you know, what we've got to do is take Steiner, you know, take Steiner's gauntlet. I mean, it's been thrown down, and think, okay, what do we do next? I mean, right, this is, the question has been set. These forces have been named and shamed. What does that mean? How do we deal with them? And what does that mean about our scheme of perception? Excuse me. as well as our future learning about these things. And, you know, those Swedenborgian stories haunt me. They haunt me. There was another one, I think, that I'll get back to the point that finishes this bit, where, I mean, the doctrine of correspondences, which of course is the key to all magic. I remember somebody telling me a couple of years ago the Picatrix wasn't worth reading. That was somebody like reading grimoires. You're kidding, yeah? So that means you know absolutely nothing about that subject. That's all that means. Yeah. The Picatrix wasn't worth reading because it was just full of correspondences. I despair. You know, so in the other world, of course, or at least some of the other worlds, the correspondences dominate. They dominate the way language is used. They dominate the way experience is experienced, the way their realities are experienced. Therefore, everything has a sort of, you know, the primitive ideas here is that there's poetic justice in heaven or the heaven worlds, which is just a different way of saying that idea in a more simplified way. You know, the doctrines of correspondences, the correspondences have a much more powerful way of dealing with that. Durov, forgive me, Rajput, without Christ it's impossible to break the illusions. Amen. And I fully agree. Right, that put me off my chain. Yeah, so, you know, spirits can be seen without feet because there's a correspondence there. Oh, no, that put me off. I'm going to have to think of... So some of the other examples are where a man is in a large hall with other men, and what they've actually got in front of them are bags of dust, but they are experiencing the bags of dust as bags of gold. And what he says is to, again, the guide and Swedenborg, is that this is gold and it's all mine. But he is forced to say by some superior power, and theirs as well. So I find the psychology is incredibly believable and unsettling. What does that mean in terms of this world, which is the point I'm getting to? You know, I mean, people nowadays don't know the difference between Iron Man, the Tooth Fairy, and an angel. And they think it's all much of a muchness. It's all different ways of talking about the same phantasmagoria. It just shows they know nothing. They know nothing about the concepts. You know, what is knowledge based on? Conceptuality, even epistemology. How do we know what we know is based on conceptuality. What do we mean when we're defining terms? As they say in philosophy, the rules of judgment, you know, we have to set them and agree upon them, or nothing can be discussed at all. And, you know, it just strikes me that the West has sunk so low now. We've forgotten, Rushford is completely correct, we've forgotten what Christ is. You know, and there's nothing wrong with all these endless books on Christ the man, which was possible, you know, the fashion after Albert Schweitzer, a man I really deeply admire. But we've done that. What about Christ the Superman? What about Christ the God-man? Which really wasn't done to full effect in the Middle Ages, whether we liked it or not, because you had Christ the Emperor, Christ the King, and unless you obey your Emperor and King, you'll be for it. I mean, so, you know, the Middle Ages didn't have the last word on these things. And we've got to think, okay, let's get back to basics. Let's get back to fundamentals. Let's become fundamentalists in the best of all senses. What do these things actually mean? What are the differences between those things? How do we experience them differently, which we are bound to once we know the differences? And does that begin to reopen the door for Christ as divine savior? They don't have these problems in Orthodox countries. I suspect that I'll shut up, John. partly the reason is that they're influenced by Plato. Those types of theology are much more influenced by Plato than Aristotle. Of course, Catholicism and de facto most of the Protestant churches, whether they realize that intellectual flow or not, followed Aristotle. Aristotle wants categories, but he doesn't want highfalutin. You know, what does it all mean, Aristotle? What does it? He doesn't want that, and that's because of the time frame he was in, and he was trying to establish knowledge. I mean, not a bad thing to do. But you've got all this Platonic mysticism over there, where they are aware of what these things mean, whether it's intuitionally, whether it's by intuition or by inherited tradition, we can argue about that one, or simply by the sort of the frame of reference which people are educated in. And those sorts of problems wouldn't arise. Therefore, I assume, long answer, apart from that Christ as our sovereign and our saviour, that we've got to remember what that means in the West and why that's more important than going to an, oh God, it seems like I'm attacking Marvel all the time, and why that's more important than a Marvel movie. A couple of hours of entertainment, no matter how good, isn't worth 5 minutes in church. What do you think, John?
Well, that reminds me of the old saying, I know a lot of musicians. I was in the music business and did record production with Roy Cicala, who owned the record plant. And he was one of the last people John Lennon saw alive, and I've heard recordings of John Lennon's that Yoko hasn't even heard. And so it's a question of how deep in the water you go. It's like I described, like, well, Fox News is like the kiddie pool, It's like they give you like just a little titillation regarding subplots that are going on in the real world, and so and life is like that. I mean, it really does break down to correspondences and languages and the objective basis of language. I'd have to look for it, or I'd bring up that quote of Swedenborg where he's communicating with the angels, and there's certain angels that are commenting, well, they don't understand the words he's saying in their realm, but they're picking up on the feelings regarding what he's saying. And so it's kind of like, it reminds one of modern language, where a word has a meaning based upon the way in which you express it, the way in which you apply within the realm of feeling what it means. And you can even go beyond that, and like, for example, in the language of the Eskimo of the far north, they have 47 words for snow. Okay, so that's like kind of like the story. I've told this before, but I think it's been over a year, so it'll be good again. A very good friend of mine, who I worked on some projects with, artistic type projects, collectible cards for artists and whatnot. But he was working on a project for David Lynch, and he's on there with his art director, who's the guy's like the artistic genius guy, and David Lynch had his attorney on there, and so David Lynch and the artistic director are discussing what color green are they going to have on the border, and the art director's got this stack of swatches on a spool, and you can go through and it's got like every possible color. Okay, and they're going, well, we could do this one over here, and they're discussing all these different greens, and the attorney breaks in. He goes, okay, so we've decided the border's going to be green. And that's kind of where we are philosophically regarding pretty much every question in life. It's so when you say something to somebody who's a specialist in that, it doesn't necessarily mean that they know what you mean by what you just said. And so it becomes a challenge of the nth degree, and especially when you get into like the law and litigation and all of that, where they're going to throw a bunch of proprietary language at you. And within law, I remember reading a contract one time to an attorney, and just a paragraph, and I read it to him, and then I said what I thought it meant, because it looked as though it was very clearly making a statement of fact. And I said, does it mean this? And he said, well, no. Because every word in that sentence has been used, and there's a long stack of precedents regarding decisions that were made regarding the particular word, as like Bill Clinton trying to change the meaning of the word is, you know, and so language can be unreliable at times at best, but it's what we have to work with within the realm of communication, and that's why it brings to mind again Jesus Christ's his response to Pontius Pilate. He didn't say anything, and so that I personally I think that music is closer to the truth because it just is, and it's not suffering from some kind of framework like language that can be expressed arbitrarily or even improperly. People frequently use words and they don't even understand the meaning of that word, what it actually means. And so that's the kind of world in which we're living. We're encased in falsehoods. And so to get into the let's see back here, that's the sword, that's the word. And it's to be able to have that discernment, to be able to parse things correctly, and that is one of the keys. And that's the power of the logos. And Christ was able to show people the objective lessons through bringing people back from the dead through the power of the word, driving out demons, and all of it. And in fact, if somebody needs an exorcist, even if they're Muslim, they'll call a priest. You know, so they don't mess around with that. But yet Pope Francis, he changed the exorcism rite, the official exorcism rite, shortened it. So is it as effective? Why would he do that? You know, he's trying to humanize the exorcism ritual. Maybe he doesn't even believe in anything. We don't know. And so that's the world in which we live in. We really don't know what people mean so often. So it behooves oneself to not go overboard on passing judgment on others.
Well, we shouldn't do that anyway. I mean, judge not lest you be judged. Oh gosh, you said a load as always. Yeah, I don't know what our brother Francis is doing. I do a lot of the time. I do know rumours that I've been told recently that the plan is to attack and demolish Catholic traditionalism and basically cozy up to the United Nations as an NGO, the religious feel-good factor for the globe. You'd be amazed at who told me that. Not Leo, and not. I mean, it was a Jesuit that told me that. And I think, gosh, you know, is that John?
Well, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's as if Francis is attempting to morph the church into a really, really large real estate trust.
I mean, what started as a sort of liberal ministry is taking some very bizarre turns, and it does sort of look like at least certain people have that in mind. You know, let's be the so-called religious feel-good factor for the United Nations. Um, what a terrifying thought! And of course, I mean, I'm on the liberal side of the discussion, but I do notice that's happening. I also notice that Catholic contemplatives are being attacked. Why? No one would do that in Buddhism. The Sangha is what the Sangha is. No one would attack them. Why are Catholic contemplatives being attacked? I mean, one of the phrases floating around recently was it's too unworldly. I mean, what is that meant to mean? Yeah, and shortening. I wanted to say occult. I'm going to withdraw that word. Oh my God, I've said it. You know, occult rituals, sacred rituals, when they've probably been measured and formulated for very real reasons in all the different parts, strikes me as absolutely bizarre. So what is he doing and what's going on there? I mean, I was personally offended. I mean, there was a priest in Catholic circles recently, I believe it was in Italy, who was holding mass. Now, there are different things at work here. I don't know what the arguments between all the different churches are half the time, because Holy Mass, Holy Communion, and the memorial feast are done differently and they mean different things. So what are we arguing about? We're not even trying to say that, they're not the same thing. But this guy was actually holding mass in the sea on an inflatable for anyone that could be bothered to put their bottle of beer down and join in. That is called sacrilege, darling. That is not called innovation. That is not called progressive Christianity. That is called sacrilege. And I've been outraged about that ever since. I'm outraged, and told my Jesuit friends about it, and they were outraged. And apparently, I won't call him a priest. The gentleman in question said he might have gone a bit too far. You're kidding, yeah? He might have gone a bit too far, and modern life. No. The mysteries aren't on their knees to modern life. It's the other way round. I'm really sorry you can't see that. But it does show the trends at work within the Catholic Church itself as the big brother, as the elder statesman of all the other Christian churches in the West, whether the other Christian churches in the West like that or not. It is the big brother. It's a sort of the big cheese that started it all. There we are, a fact. And it might have gone wrong and it might have done all sorts of other things, but it's the big brother. And if it's going down that route, we all have problems, all of us. There's a knock-on effect. I mean, it comes down to other things as well. I mean, why are we always on our knees to youth culture? Why are we always on our knees to modernization? And those things aren't necessarily. And if we go back to we can be progressives and still aware of sacred mysteries. They're not antithetical to each other. We can be traditionalists and aware that the church has made mistakes. Hey, it's human, yeah. I don't know what these false either ors are in the equation. Either you're with us or you're against us. No. If real Christians are discussing these things and looking for the truth, that can never be the position that they adopt. Because how could they? They're looking for the truth. I'll hand that back to you for a minute, John, because there are a couple of things I want to say at length. No, I'll just say one other thing. At the end of the day, I think it's all to do with our worldview. No, I'm not going to start sounding like Billy Graham. Is there a supernatural or isn't there? Is there a supernatural realm or isn't there? It's that simple. Personally, I say there is, and therefore my discourse, my narrative, when I'm addressing certain facts of life, will be coloured by that. But okay, now let's look at the physicists and the high priesthood when they can get their eyes out of the various telescopes, looking at the edge of the universe. They are postulating 10 dimensions. They are now postulating, higher order realities. I mean, that's an old philosophical term, but they're using that term. They are postulating different orders of being. That is a phrase they're using at the moment. So hang on, can you backtrack a minute? What is the difference between that and talking about the supernatural? Which is why words are important if you're talking about the paranormal and say something like a supernatural rite, like exorcism. The paranormal, by definition, Oswald, I've no doubt of it. Oswald Spengler's just said machine elves. I've absolutely no doubt of it. The paranormal at the end of the day must be an adjunct to the normal. So in other words, it's an extra bit. Lyle Watson and his wonderful book, Supernature, from all those years ago, was actually barking up the wrong tree. If it's all paranormal, they're just extra abilities, they're just extra facets of what we all know now. That is not the supernatural. The supernatural must be based on the idea, the concept of other realms of being, which, surprise, surprise, the physicists in particular are now talking about. So I don't see why this type of thinking is illegitimate or illicit anymore, since they are doing exactly the same thing from a different point of view? What do you think, John?
Well, they like to think that they're going to get approval in academia, and so they have to tread lightly, or they won't get their tenure, or they won't get a grant, or so that there's this marshaling of forces in academia to try and rein in, because these things are allowed but not permitted, right? Yes, of course you could think that, but we're not going to print your article. And so then they have to go to some kind of outside publication, and there's more of them in Europe. Some really kind of good things are being done in Amsterdam, and Netherlands in particular. All around there with some. I've gotten some wonderful books over the years from there. That they're not shy about approaching subjects that have become basically taboo in Oxford and Cambridge. They don't. They don't have any room for any of that kind of stuff that they can. I guess they consider it speculative nonsense, and so good on them. They could stay where they're at for as long as they like, and I'm not being proud, but they're kind of like carrying on with Malthus and Julian Huxley and all these really like overbearing British souls that want to try and find a way in which they can enforce this top-down superstructure that's going to assess things based upon criteria and as far as relevance and so forth. I mean, it almost hurts my head thinking about that and formulating a sentence that would do it justice. So you have this reductio ad absurdum, that you reduce things down. Well, let's just, okay, can you make that simpler? Just break it down to, let's see if we can break it down to one formula. Oh yeah, E equals MC squared. Oh, there, we got it, And it's kind of funny because what Rudolf Steiner had said about that, he said that, well, the real problem with that equation is that the reality is to be found in the velocity. I'll let you wrestle with that, figure out whatever you think that he meant by that. And so it's amazing how important the single word is. And then when you get into Owen Barfield and his studies of language and the evolution of consciousness, and then you try to connect that to spiritual science and anthroposophy. The word anthroposophy is often tied back to the alchemist Thomas Vaughan, the brother of Henry Vaughan, the poet, noted poet. And Thomas Vaughan died in 1666, and he wrote a book, Anthroposophia Theomagica, and it had to do with the magic of being human, and taking that kind of Paracelsian, Agrippan view of mankind that actually, within the realm of the esoteric sciences, is very relevant. And that's the nub, is that people have lost the capacity to understand magical thinking, which is essentially very strongly Aristotelian, by the way. Although people like to think, well, that's just Neoplatonic. Yeah, it's Neoplatonic too. See, and you have to realize that the Neoplatonists didn't think of themselves as Neoplatonists. They consider themselves Platonists, and that they were merely discussing the subject as it was presented within Plato, and also by his principal student, or one of his principal students, Aristotle. And so the kind of distinctions that come to mind that have like encrusted over the centuries regarding all those names and what they may mean and all of that. But go to the great Platonic school, the school of Chartres in the Middle Ages. One of the finest examples of that Platonic stream. And then you have the Aristotelian. You could say that that's more the scientific and philosophical, logical side of the equation, whereas the more artistic side and whatnot is the Platonic stream. You could look at it and you could see, like in the writings of some of the great teachers of the School of Chartres, and that you can look that up on Wikipedia and get all kinds of clues. Wonderful, wonderful. And it is easier to approach the sacred artistically. There's no question about it. And it has to do with that whole idea of that conceptual trap, that one can try to think things through, and as a result of whatever skill one may have or not have, not be able to formulate something that actually has a resonance with the thing in which you're discussing. See, that you're speaking objective language rather than just subjective, describing your own position in the cage, so to speak. And so we cage ourselves in with every word. Basically, we keep our mental content so busy with our descriptions of the world of the senses that we just don't leave enough room for the supersensible to enter the room. It reminds me of the Albigensians. When they would have a meal, they would always leave a chair just in case the master would show up. And so there's that whole tone of waiting for Godot, is like in that great play, and that's that struggle, is that, okay, fine, but I don't see anything. That's the argument of a lot of the scientific types, and that's, well, it's not time yet. It's like the discussion I had with Timothy Leary, where I'm explaining to him my experience of leaving my body, and did he have any kind of basis as to why my thinking would function outside of my brain? And he, being brutally honest, said no. And no, he hadn't had an experience like that, and he was very interested and very respectful about it. He didn't dismiss it at all. Of course, he's had so many paranormal experiences, that just happens to be one he hadn't had. So you see, and it wasn't due to drugs, by the way. It just spontaneously happened in the middle of the day. And I just popped up to the ceiling for a minute or two and looked down at the top of my head and found the pencil I was looking for behind the chair, exactly as I saw it. So there are these realities, and how do you argue with somebody who hasn't had the experience? It goes back to, in a certain sense, the book by Mark Hetzel, The Zealoter, a modern initiate, where he's talking to somebody and he says, can you leave your body? And the person he's talking to says, no. He says, well, why am I talking to you? So in other words, that there is a hierarchy of these things, that you just can't mess around when you refer to somebody as an initiate. It isn't just somebody who's taken some exam. An adept isn't somebody who's just good at something. An adept in occultism is in reference to somebody with profound supernormal powers, where an initiate is somebody with profound supernormal knowledge. And so it becomes very complex, and it's actually far more complex than physics if you want to really get into these things. And you can get people that are considered to be profound in their knowledge regarding the esoteric, and then you realize that they don't have a cosmology, and therefore, how deep can you be if you don't have a cosmology? If you don't know that the Earth is the fourth world, in terms of occultism, you haven't even begun. And I say that in all humility. It's that I had to resign myself to it because I see that it's reality. The idea that you have a physical body, an etheric body, and an astral body, and above that is the ego. That's the kurios. That's the way in which you connect to the Lord. And that's the basis of all that stuff that one might contemplate. That's the most fundamental aspect to it. And it's the whole idea of being able to be humble enough to recognize the suffering that has gone into making it possible for you to have this existence that you're going through. And that it was due to the efforts of others, other beings, that it's possible for you to exist. The sacrifice of the plants that you eat, or any domestic animals you may consume, or it's so involved. And so in my mind, all it does is make, the more I talk about it, the humbler I get, until you end up like Socrates, and he says, well, I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing.
Yeah, I think there's a sad truth to what you were saying. I mean, unless somebody's had some of these experiences, we're probably going round in circles and we'll never get beyond linguistic descriptions of theoretical state. What is a reality to somebody would not be a reality to somebody else. And a case in point is I've actually seen ectoplasm, and it's not what people say it is. I mean, it tends to be amber in color, sort of strong yellow amber color. It rushes across the ceiling and then suddenly drops to the floor. So I've seen it. Saying that to most people simply won't make any sense. And trying to John,
I wouldn't go around bragging about that. It might make you suspect in certain circles.
Oh no, I may. I think they just ignore it when I say things like that. No, I mean, these things happen. Well, what do we do with them? And unless you're open to those experiences, then it gets nowhere. I mean, certainly the spiritualists and their mock-ups, they should have been a bit more honest, or at least a bit more direct in saying to people, these are mock-ups. We're not trying to say these are actual, we're not filming actual occurrences, mostly the weird cotton wool around weird faces and, fat ladies, with respect to fat ladies, sat staring at the ceiling is a mock-up. And it's where certain types of discourse are being actively discouraged for no reason whatsoever, apart from maybe funding and arrogance. Two reasons. I mean, Platonism runs very deeply in Britain. Agatha Velvet, Amsterdam is the new Hermetic capital, if you will. Wow, what a wonderful statement, Agatha. I hope that's true. It wouldn't surprise me. I really hope that's true. The Platonism and its table turning, the Neoplatonists, I agree with you 100%. They wouldn't have called themselves Neoplatonists, and all their table turning and spirit rapping and all of the pursuit of the paranormal which they engaged in. John,
have you been to Amsterdam?
Well, a couple of times, yeah.
Have you been to the Ritman Library?
No, never had the chance. Never had the chance.
You've heard of it, yes? Yeah. That's what he's Agatha's pointing at. I mean, that Ritman Library that's like kind of on a level like Manly P. Hall's Philosophical Research Society, what it once was.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done a fair bit of traveling, but the trouble is most of it's been to do with work. I mean, it's not been to do with leisure time. So literally, the schedule is in front of you, and you have to do it. And you might be given an hour's freedom, but then you find you're the other side of the country or something. So no, I'd absolutely love to see more of Amsterdam and more of that particular library. And hopefully that opportunity, will open up. But certainly there's Oxford and Cambridge, just shut up. The religion of the new priesthood, reductive scientific materialism. If you say anything else, you won't get your sweeties, you won't get your smarties. No candy for you then at the end of the evening. Oh, they've got to grow up. They don't represent what's best in British academia, and British academia is far too narrow at the minute anyway. I mean, a couple of years back, the best medievalist in the country actually taught at the University of Reading. He didn't teach in Oxford and Cambridge. So, I love the architecture, love punting, great stuff. But let's not get carried away by this juvenile rubbish. And they charge the earth to gullible foreigners who think they're buying into this whole elite thing. Well, maybe you are in a certain way, but not academically. What they're trying to do is resist the native flow towards Platonism. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, and you're correct, John. I mean, it's to do with funding. That will be removed. That will be reduced. You won't be in a recognised, referee journal. I mean, they're using ridiculous phrases now. Like it's not even a referee journal. It has to be a referee journal of a particular type. Why don't you just say that there are no conditions whatsoever by which you will allow this type of discussion? Why not just say it? And now there are only certain publishers that can really be considered serious. That is a joke. That is a joke. But that is, excuse me, where we're all heading. And shame on the church. Most of the churches are such a shambles. They're either riddled with prejudice, which means they're not worth looking at, or they're so liberal they're falling apart at the seams like some weird melting jelly in the summertime. I mean, God, is there much hope at all with any of this? I just wish I was a grouchy tiny Methodist with my own little parish and bouncing around and talking about all this stuff on Sunday afternoons with John Barnwell. But look at them. They're not what they were. I mean, and they've decided to go legit, of course. I mean, the Methodist Church, the Wesleys were absolutely incredible. And they would be, I'm going to be very careful with the type of language I'm using. They would allow the supernatural to come through them and manifest itself in this world. I mean, it wasn't unknown in this country for entire congregations but to be discovered by the local police flat on their back in a trance, where the preacher had let the power of the Spirit through and literally knocked, I'd love to do that, knocked the congregation for six. John?
Well, it comes to mind the Methodists. That is an interesting take on the Christian tradition. It's interesting because my family actually, going back, of course, they were Catholic, as was everybody at one time, for the most part. And then when they came in with William the Conqueror, and then finally came over and were in the very first wave into Cork, conquering Ireland and establishing a base there with the Roman Christian tradition, and then vacillating back and forth based upon mandates from the crown to the church, the Anglican Church, and then back to Catholic, and the recusants, and there was Patrick Barnwell spent 2 years in the Tower of London because King James, he was a recusant. They were given a mandate. They had to attend a Church of England, the Anglican Church, and he refused to do it on the grounds that he was Catholic. And after 2 years, it was a big breakthrough for King James I. And he said, I'm not going to kill somebody based on their religious beliefs. And so that was a big step. It seems kind of silly today, but that's the way things were. I mean, the church would go back and forth, and the crown would say, you have to be this way. And if you don't go along with it, suffer the pain of death. And then they'd go back to the other, and they'd say the same thing. And so people, out of fear of their life, would go through this conversion, whatever degree in which they embraced it or even understood the difference. Becomes a moot point. And so the recusants were largely out of the educated classes of the nobility, the Norman, Anglo-Norman lords, and landholders and so forth in Ireland. But pretty early on, there was a breakaway from my family into being Methodist, and they just disowned them entirely. So they kind of took off and eventually ended up in Philadelphia. And that's the line that connects me to the Roosevelts. And so it's all interesting, and like history is like this ongoing argument about things that people don't always even understand what they're arguing about. And so that's one of the reasons why history fascinates me so much. It's because the utter lack of clarity and the propagation of propaganda is astounding. When you look and you see that most modern history is based on particular authors from Cambridge and Oxford that are doing kind of a puff piece regarding the role of the crown in world society, and you get into Arnold Toynbee and Will and Ariel Durant and Winston Churchill and all these people. And that's what we've been having fun with, so to speak, over at American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation, is looking beneath the hood and finding out, well, what really did happen, and not what these these historical pieces. Then we'll get a lot of things right, but in there, many things are not disclosed, so to speak. Like even in Carroll Quigley in Tragedy and Hope, he never mentions the Pilgrim Society, which is really the hub of all this nonsense that everybody's going through at the present time. And that was founded in 1902 in London, and then founded just a couple years later in New York. And so things are not what people think they are. So let's just be humble, and let's try and see if there could be more Christ instead of me, as far as myself is concerned. And I just have to resign myself to that and try to find clarity.
Amen to everything you said. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, in America, I think it's always the struggle between Methodists and Baptists, isn't it? Over here, that doesn't exist because the Anglican Church manages to crush all of us. The glory of having a state church is it can crush anything it wants to. I've no time for Welby. I've no time for Anglicanism. If there's one good thing we've learned from the Yanks, and there are very many, disestablish the church as soon as you possibly can. I mean, you've got to remember, and it's a branch of government. John.
Yeah, what do they say? Disestablishmentarianism. Most people are familiar with anti-disestablishmentarianism as being the longest word in the word game that kids would play, but yeah, disestablishing the mentarianism. That's the thing, is disestablishing the mind control is basically what it is. We have a word for it today, and it's really kind of threatening, because it usually is whatever form they cast it into, it has the word operation in front of it.
As much as I like the Curé of Ars, and all of those stories, the small guy winning through effectively. Yeah, and I'm not an anti-disestablishmentarianism, but I'm a disestablishment guy. Yeah, I mean, all these word plays and little nuances, they're important. They're important to keep us human and to keep the debate human. And it's important to remember that, in the House of Lords, there are the so-called Lords Spiritual. I'm not sure there's much spiritual about them. In other words, the representatives of the Church of England that form that branch of government. People tend to forget that means every Anglican church is actually a government department. It's a government building. That is far too easily forgotten. And what I don't like is the fact that everything must be done in that manner and meet with their approval. That really gets up my nose, to be honest. And other churches have started here and flourished elsewhere simply because they could never never flourish here. No, there's something very human in Methodism. I wish all that had worked out. I don't think it ever will, but I wish that had. Because it did start with signs and portents and marvels and good, honest, ordinary men and women who had discovered something above, something higher, something deeply religious with a capital R above themselves. And it was coming into their lives and it was coming into their communities. And it made a difference. They felt the drinking habits of the completely politically disenfranchised weren't a reflection on them. It was more a reflection on the state. Sunday schools, people forget in this country what Sunday schools were all about. That was the only education anybody got. The kids would look at illustrated Bibles. Adults would go and learn how to read and how to write. When the monstrosities of the Industrial Revolution in this country were breaking up families violently and physically violently and politically oppressing entire communities, it was only the weak free church end. It was only that end of Christianity that was doing any good. The Anglican Church was behind all of it. You know, good on you, Lord Muck. Make another couple of million. No. And it was these silly little Methodists and silly little Baptists and silly little Quakers that thought all of that is just wrong, and used to set up Sunday schools and used to set up temperance societies and used to try and help women with unwanted pregnancies. It was them that was doing it all. They made sure that this country didn't sink into barbarism. It is now, but it's a couple of centuries ago as opposed to now. And all of that tends to be forgotten, and shame on all of us for never giving credit where it's due and not seeing what they were trying to say in good time. You know, and now everyone's got a point to prove about everything and nobody's listening to anyone. And the goodness that has been done by those people has largely been forgotten. And dare I say, is that one of the machinations of the Anglican Church? Because they want it to look like them, but it never was you and it never will be you, because you've got too much land, you've got too much property, and too many concerns in the actual government of this country. Shame on you. What do you think, John?
Yeah, that's the rub, you know, and I guess, you know, here in the colonies, I mean America, depends on how you look at it. Corporate, in terms of corporate structures, I guess we are a colony, and in that we never really won the American Revolution like people think. And in fact, you can look and see that Alexander Hamilton, who's vaunted as some kind of hero here, and he was actually a minion of the Bank of England. Before he even came to America, he had aligned himself with those people before he even came to America. And he had his ties and was receiving intelligence through Montreal in Quebec, specifically Quebec, which is where Abraham Lincoln went for a couple of weeks to try and get the Canadians to pull in with us, which of course they didn't. And so Canada's unique in that it's actually, they still have a queen, right? And that's unique in the Americas, a country that has that kind of a government, even though people in England might think, well, that's not what we're doing here. We're doing this thing with the House of Commons and the House of Lords and all that. That's all well and good. But all the secret committees, the only one who knows who's even on the secret committees is the Queen. And their communications are in those little red boxes in the middle of the night. And so let's be real. It's at the behest of the Queen that the House of Parliament is a functioning place of activity. And so, like I said, things are not what people think they are. And the Privy Council's the most important superstructure in England, just as here in the US we have the Senior Executive Service. in our government. Most people don't even know what that is. They've never heard of it. SES. It was established back during Carter, and we're the ones that have done the major research regarding the Senior Executive Service, which is essentially the Privy Council of the United States, and they're functionaries, they're civilian generals that are beneath the cabinet that cannot be fired by the president, and they make oodles of money, and they give each other bonuses at the end of the year and all this stuff, and it's a whole thing about no bid contracts and strange things like a company like Serco run by the grandson of Winston Churchill, Rupert Soames, and but they're running our patent trademark office. So you tell me what could possibly be good about having a foreign country running the patent trademark office for the United States? And they also run the communications on military bases and airports, and it's the largest corporation people have never heard of. And we did the deep dive on all that, and so it's disturbing when you start to find out what's really going on. But that being said, that's a good thing that we've got Jesus Christ to help us out with all this, or we'd be in real deep trouble. But that being said, I think we should perhaps pause it and refresh our memory here. Here's the publications by the Reverend David William Parry, The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is a Shakespearean study. As I've frequently said, it's not a grimoire. And here's his Shakespearean-esque poetry. And he's been getting some of his work produced on stage, which is very exciting. And here's his major work, Mount Athos Inside Me, edited by the very talented Daniele-Hadi Irandoost. And this is Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. And then there's Daniela's book himself, the philosophy of education towards an anthroposophical view. And that's available, as are David's books, on Amazon. And you can even download a free digital copy of On the Philosophy of Education by Daniela on Amazon. And as for me, I have two books. The first one is some 640 pages, The Arcana, the Grail, Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail. And that has a foreword by Douglas Gabriel of American Intelligence Media, my best friend, and has extensive diagrams and based on the work of Rudolf Steiner, from handwritten watercolored diagrams across my desk many, many years ago. And I was able to crib some notes off them and then add a bunch more diagrams in my second volume, The Arcana of Light on the Path. And in here, you see explorations of the spiritual cosmology of the Grail language, the Christ language. And I'm sure some Baptists might have a problem with that statement, and that's okay. I don't mind. It doesn't hurt me when people disagree, as long as they allow me to disagree. Yeah, and so it's ultimately, amen, the mystery of Golgotha. I realize where we would be if Christ didn't save us in the earth through that mystery. That's from Mary. Yes, thank you for summing it up so well, Mary. And my books are available on eBay directly from me. And if you're outside the US, you can contact me by private message on Facebook, or you can go below and there's a link to my academia page, and you can download a free PDF of the foreword to my second book that was written by William Bento, the noted astrosopher and psychologist. And you can download that for free on my academia page. And if you are moved to do so, and it's nice when people do this, but you can buy us a cup of coffee or any donation. Nothing is too small. And it helps keep this ship moving along. And for Reverend David, it's paypal.me/dparry777. And for myself, it's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And of course, I want to thank some very, very special people, as this podcast has been made possible by the generous support of Tyler and Vadim and Vivian and Neil and Christian and Mark and Maud and Druvman and Laura and Paula and Rick and Michael and Beth, Ishtar and Anna, Russell, and so many others over the years. I want to thank you all for supporting our humble efforts. And click like and subscribe to my channel if you like following this. And I have other things coming up also. And Reverend David has other exciting things coming up. He's such a busy guy. He amazes me when he tells me what he actually does when I'm not in contact with him, because these are the only conversations we really have. We don't really get to do much of a regular old chinwag. So in any regards, yeah, I don't want to keep David too long today, because I know he gets a little tired when he has a day where he gives a service. So anything he wants to say, and he can lead us into a wonderful prayer to consecrate our efforts.
No, it's my fault, and I plead 100% guilty to not being more of a continuous friend to you. I can promise you, you are a very good friend to me. It's just I feel, and this is an excuse, and never make excuses, stretching us 1,000 directions at once, but I will do my best to correct that situation. Gosh, I mean, this show has raised so many issues, particularly the one where imagination is actually collapsing into mere fantasy, which really does need looking at some point. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, there's nothing wrong with fantasy, provided everything else is remembered as well, like other types of life, other forms of consciousness, and everything isn't reduced to fantasy. Because then I think people are being corralled into a prison world at the minute, and they're going joyously into it until it's too late. And I wonder how close we are to that time. John?
It's the old Pied Piper of Hamelin.
Oh God, on that depressing thought. My friends, I am nearly out of energy at the minute. So I'm going to say a very, very simple prayer. Let's remember each other in the hours and the days ahead. Let's pray for each other at the beginning of the dawn and at the closing of the night. And let's be with each other, at least in spirit, to strengthen our witness, our humanity, and our ministry until we all meet again. God bless you, and amen.
And God bless you, and God bless you all, and amen. And I so look forward to these conversations, my brother. And I want to thank you. We've been quite diligent here. I just happened to think about it today, but we're punctual. That's pretty good, I remember with Leo, we were frequently 10 minutes late. You got 10 minutes to launch, or the thing clears and you have to set the whole thing up all over again. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody coming with us here on our little journey in the exploration of the world of ideation. And so you all have a good week.